Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. I read Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah this year and was blown away. I rarely post my reading list to social media, but when I did, he was kind enough to respond. There are certain books that leave you with strong feelings. Chain Gang All-Stars is one of these books. Nana writes in a way that is both captivating and sends a deeper message. The themes in the novel tackle slavery, systemic racism, the failure of the prison system, love, growth, mental health, and so much more. I urge everyone to give it a read or listen and feel free to leave comments. Nana was an absolute delight, and I learned so much from this conversation. We also geek out over cosplay, anime, manga, and hip-hop. I'm excited to share this conversation and hope you enjoy the listen. My favor, as usual, is to please continue to share this podcast with others. It would also mean so much if you would rate it and leave me feedback. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, visit my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Nana. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my goodness. I hope you have like 4 or 5 hours because I just have a few questions.
Perfect. I'm honored. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, gosh. Well, I just have to say, one, I rarely post things on social media that has to do with my current reads list, which is, my listeners know I kind of fail at social media. I'm not great at it, but when I do, it's very rare. And I read your book, Chain Gang All-Stars, and I just felt like I needed everybody to know that this is what I'm reading and I'm so excited. And then you were so kind because you texted back and acknowledged, and I was so beyond thrilled. And yeah, so this is really great.
It's really cool. Yeah, I mean, you caught me at a pretty good time. It's been a little bit chaotic because of the book, and now it's award season, and before that I was on tour. But I don't know if I was already following you, but I definitely seen just on videos or little viral videos or things before. Okay. Obviously, I know you've done much more things than the one particular movie, but I had seen that, and I think any type of martial arts like character modeling I'm really interested in.
Nice.
And that kind of stuff. So it was very cool for me. I just told my little sister that I was talking to you, and she was like very impressed.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, the Disney princess thing goes a long way for quite a while. It's kind of amazing. But yeah. And speaking of which, congratulations, because I think since we first connected, you had book award nominations and things are coming your way. So congrats already, which I knew was going to start happening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear a little bit about actually where you were raised in New York, because you're from up north, upstate New York. You're like, kind of now you're in the Bronx, but I'd love to hear about kind of the dynamic in your household, having Ghanaian heritage, all of that. Like, I'm always fascinated.
So I was born in Queens, New York. Both my parents are from Ghana. And they came my dad came first. He was in Tulane down in the New Orleans area, but I was born in Queens, Corona specifically. Then around younger, 9-ish, I moved to, so I've been way upstate, but I'm really just 30 minutes outside the city, Spring Valley, Rockland County is where I'm from. Okay. And it's just over the bridge. And it's my particular area in Rockland County, which again is called Spring Valley, is pretty interesting. It's pretty diverse. It's a lot of first generation immigrants. So it's my school was a bunch of Haitians, a bunch of South Americans, some people like me who are children of Ghanaian immigrants. And in the house, I think my parents kind of fit the sort of, immigrant parent stereotype. Maybe they even exceed some of those stereotypes, whereas 93 is failing kind of thing.
Okay.
And
so they were checking the report cards.
They cared a lot. Eventually, I think things got, so there was a time when they were very, very hyper vigilant about it. And, you knew they kept a pretty high standard. You had to always be reading or doing something. My parents were the kind of parents who dropped you off to the library when it opened and picked you up when it closes.
Nice.
but to me that was fun. I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And luckily I liked reading. But all that has to do with my older sister, I think.
Okay.
But also my younger sister's a big reader as well. And so reading was cool in my household. And I think and they were very on top of grades and stuff until like, I guess different things happen, whether it be like sickness in if my mom got sick, she wasn't able to work for a while. And like, then, that kind of puts pressure. Then we had to leave the house we were in, go to an apartment, then so that was like a foreclosure thing and then eviction stuff. And it ended up, there's a lot of pressure that was just, I think, getting put on like financially during like that recession time and all that time and the times after, which I think made everyone like focus on the grades a little bit less specifically, but it was just like an understood thing that you were going to be doing good in school. But I just say that to say it helped me in some ways because even when I decided a lot of people are like, oh, how did your parents allow you to be a writer? And I think by then I was sort of like sailing my own ship at a pretty young age. Like my parents were engaged and there to providing, but it was sort of like, you do your thing. They check in sort of briefly. You're in school, right? You're in college? Good. and then I sort of was making my own decisions, I think, at a pretty young age.
Yeah. And so it seems like you always had a very healthy relationship with books, being dropped off at the library. Where did you find yourself as a youngster, in the library kind of gravitating towards? Is there certain books that made bigger impressions on you?
Absolutely. I was sort of big on like the sci-fi, fantasy, serial thing. So, I mean, I'm part of like the OG Harry Potter generation, I guess.
All right.
But also there's like the Animorphs stuff. I think a lot of Garth Nix books were big. And I was like the Pendragon series. There's like big fantasy epic things that kind of like made you imagine worlds that were like bigger and maybe more fantastic than your own. But also what was also cool about that time is I was 0% jaded about like this or that, and I think it's kind of served me now, which is set in a way because like I had almost zero genre awareness. Genre wasn't a thing I thought about, and it's not a thing I think about in my own writing. And so I kind of just read with it. I thought it had like a cool cover, and then and went from there.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, jumping into you as a writer, I was trying to be a good podcaster and look up, and I could see that you clearly had kind of made that decision. Your scholastic endeavors pushed you towards writing. You were very focused. I know you did things through college and everything, but as like a young student, was it already something you were creatively making up stories because you're such an avid reader?
Yes, I was making up stories, even though I never thought I could be a writer. If that somehow like that connection wasn't fully settled in my mind's eye. So it was sort of like, I want to be a writer. I like making stories, and I'll do it. And I did it like my dad's legal pads, or even me and my friends would like almost like serially do like just orally maintain like a narrative, almost like anime style, manga style, like, arc of stories that we all had like a particular investment in one of the characters, almost like tabletop without the tabletop game. Like almost like we didn't have a D&D and we never did that, but we almost did it just ourselves.
Yeah.
And it was like a really cool imaginative exercise. And I think those kind of collaborative imaginative things like led into me doing stuff on my own.
Yeah, well, it's obviously led you to a really great place. I'll obviously want to talk about Chain Gang All Stars as well as Friday Black, because I didn't get to read the whole thing yet, but even just like the first 10 pages, it's like, oh man, that right there, these paragraphs is going to take about an hour to get through, and let alone Chain Gang All Stars. But when we started reading this book, my husband and I were in a book club. We love reading. I will say I'm an audiobook reader, quote unquote, and that kind kind of, for this story especially, made it super rich because you could just feel like you were in the action. But immediately, without speaking to one another, our minds just went to the same place, which was Bryan Stevenson, you know, and the 13th documentary, and just the themes of the prison industrial complex, you know, and just how it's a failed experiment. Prison is a failed experiment. And I describe this to people. I'm like, well, it's supposedly this dystopian story, but is it really dystopian? Because I mean, how far do you think we are from this, you know, reality TV world of where we already seeing things that are like live in prisons, and us as humans just gravitating towards what do we want to see? We want to see the violence. We're fascinated by it. We can't look away. Yep. But you managed to deliver such a poignant, important message. But it was wildly entertaining, which kind of gives you this little bit of guilt of like, wow, I'm really entertained by this, but this is absolutely horrific. So how dystopian do you really feel this is? And as you wrote it, did it feel like you were writing a story that is imminent, or did you kind of go into that fantasy, you know, kind of realm?
Yep. So I think a lot of my work likes to operate right in that like space between sort of those poles you're describing, which is like hyperbole and understatement. Like, which one is it? You know, I think my work is always like, yep, both in some ways. So, and I think books like you mentioned, like Just Mercy, the Stevenson and films like 13th are speaking to particular issues in our criminal justice system. One being that many people on death row are actually innocent.
Yeah.
And then with the latter being about the official legalization in the Constitution of slavery when considering incarcerated individuals or those convicted of crimes. So, and those are just some of like the evils of the criminal justice system. And so I think that my book is sort of asking us, what do we think we should do with those who do harm? Where does compassion fit in our world and in this system? And is there any room for compassion in it? And I think it ultimately ends up suggesting that whether dystopia is here or around the corner, it's a lot closer than we think. And again, it depends on how you define what dystopia is. But I think I want to make T-shirts that say like dystopia now, because I think just depending on where you're standing, it's here and now. I was in Shawagunkum prison 2 days ago, and talking with some people who incarcerated, sitting in on the English class, and just seeing all these people of different age ranges, obviously mostly minorities, in this space, and getting to talk to them about their work and just seeing how bright they are, thinking about how much opportunity that they aren't having because we've settled on this particular way of dealing with people who do harm. It's really easy to feel like dystopia is here right now.
Yeah, it's, the thing I took away, I want to say, and I've shared this because I do a lot of podcasts on social justice, and it's something that I try to be better about, learning more about. And when I saw the 13th, I was mortified at how little I knew and how uneducated I was in how broken this system of the prison system is. And just like, I was mortified, and so going forward, then I started to just digest everything Bryan Stevenson and asking that question, like, should we be judged for the rest of our lives for the worst day of our life, right? Like, who gets to decide that? Like, who gets to make those choices as well, right? And it's just, and for you to be able to kind of tell the story in, like I said, such a fascinating dynamic, but also constantly, like, at the core of it, having readers ask the question, I think is super important. And there's so many lines in your book that we're reading or listening, in my case, and you just want to pause to write it down because they're so, like, heavy and weighted. Like, how are you quiet and so loud at the same time? And starving man knows the price of food best. And there's just so many lines. And to me, I'm like, but I want to keep listening to the action, but then I want to rewind it and take a moment to just sit with those lines. When you write those lines, do you feel the weight and depth of it? Or is it, and like, do you stop or is it just like free flowing? Because it's very conflictive as a listener,
I think that when you're really, really writing and it's really going, you're just going with it. But I think that but also writing has many phases, you know. So through revision, I've read the book a zillion times, like probably over 100 times, and so I know that line, like, a starving man still supports it. Well, a starving man knows the price of food best, but a glutton still spills his portion to the floor. And I know who says it, and I know where that happens, and just off the top of my head, because you do try to imbue some, you know, power with it, but also it's weird. It's like a little game you have to play as a writer. And I think about this with my students as well when I'm teaching. Like, every line can't be a home run, you know, but you have to say what you want to say, and even the how you loud and quiet at the same time, or same time. Like, I remember like being almost kind of funny with that, and this, you want everything to just feel true and honest and emerge meaningfully and like realistically from the moment. But characters like Hendrix Singer Young, which, even though that's not Hendrix who says that first thing, it's someone saying it to him.
To sing Attica, yeah.
Yeah, I think he gave me a lot of room because of the nature of his like attitude and his like sort of the way his mind thought to like really take some of those swings that you're talking about, those big lines. And so I think that a lot of times when I was with him, I was generally more attuned to like those big, heavy, weighty lines, because that's the way he spoke and thought, almost like a preacher or something.
Yeah.
And so on some level I was aware, but also you want to kind of just almost, you know, zone out and let the story be the story, as opposed to like, look how impressive I can be.
Well, it is impressive. And I think it's really fascinating that in so many of your one-liners, it can almost sum up the whole book of like the theme or the feeling. And it's just throughout, especially the Simon character with, you know, he who deserves no sympathy, but won't be ever undeserving of love. Yeah. And I feel like you present this character, all the horrible things, you know, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, as somebody who has a very strong stance on yes, no, this is black and white for me. It's just those questions are so important for us as humans, right? Yeah. Because again, like, do we get judged on like, I'm a very good person that has done bad things and I'm a very bad person that has done good things kind of thing, right? And I talk to a guest all the time who we're constantly saying that, because it's like, I wouldn't want to be judged on the worst day of my life, even up to this point in my life thus far, right? And it's like, who gets to decide? But it's very heavy, but it makes you really think.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful for like the generosity of your read, because it is really tough, and the book actually asks us to think about really difficult things, and it's also, you know, not just for like the perpetrators, you know, of these terrible things, also for us, because a lot of what the book is asking is like, how can we build a world where these type of behaviors won't be so prevalent? Yeah. And part of the idea is that if we had a world that was more imbued systemically with love, that had more compassion built into it, we'd have less of these issues. We'd have less of these perpetrators, these people who are creating all these victims. You know, it's a way, even though right now we are sort of taught that the only way to honor pain is with violence and more pain and torture or death. And I think a big part of what, especially through doing the research, I've learned is that that is not necessarily effective. And in fact, it might actually grow the thing we're actually meaning to like sort of destroy. So it's a lot though, because of course, when we've all been personally aggressed, like even myself, like I'm not like, there's people who I'm like, yeah, you can't be here, you know, but I think as a community, on a society, as a global civilization, we can at least try to build something a lot better.
Yeah. And speaking of research, one of the things that jumped out, because I know that there were a lot of even statistics in here about, you know, people who are victims, they end up being aggressors, and people, you know, there was just so many stats that you had. So I would imagine that most of those are pretty much true for today's standard, right? Like what you put into the book was pretty accurate, which is appalling. But I was curious about that research and what you decided to include and why.
Yeah, so it really I tried to let the story tell me first. So like there's some big obvious ones, like it takes place in American context. And so America per capita just incarcerates more than anybody, especially any free, quote unquote, democratic nation. And that just felt like important. And that information is pretty widely available. But, you know, that's the kind of thing where I just know I just know it's going to be true as like a sort of fundamental backdrop.
Yeah.
Then there'll be situations where I have a very young person on screen, sort of on the stage, so to speak, and they are killed. And the narrator is like noting their youth. And then it gives me opportunity to be like, well, I wonder who was the youngest person ever murdered by the state. And then I could do some research and find George Stinney, and he's 14 years old. And so usually it's like that. Usually like something happens in the story that'll make me wonder about like what the real world analog is. And then I'll go research it. And that one is just a fact of that a lot of history has been done on. I mean, a lot of research has been done on already. But sometimes it's like, I'll just have to go through some peer-reviewed articles or go to that. I had a couple of like, you know, like touchstone things that really helped me in terms of like just finding the right data sets. And it was actually hard because, doing good research, you know, you really want to like get that stuff right. And there's one thing that's actually more of a typo that we're going to change in like the new printings of the book that I'm like sad about. And that has to do with the McClinsky case, which was a 5-4 Supreme Court case, which I wanted it to say that all justices who voted in like for the prosecution were white, but it says all of them were white, but Thurgood Marshall was actually on that thing. So like something like that. That's like the one thing that's in there that's like annoying me. Like,
yeah, of course it is.
Sadness. But everything else, you know, like it's been cool to have actual researchers vet it and see and make sure. I've been appreciative of that.
Yeah, because you point out, obviously, people of color, and then when you're trans, it's just like it keeps adding up to the height of your statistic going up, right, for incarceration and what that means. And so I think what you said earlier was true, that the information is out there, but the problem is us as consumers of information don't go seek that out, right? People are too busy on the TikTok and getting their news from those sources. Like that's why I think fiction reads that have such good historical context and narrative is so important, because maybe people will digest it in this context, right? It's because it's difficult. It's hard to digest this information and not want to see it as true, right?
It's part of the purpose. Absolutely. And I think because it is hard to digest it and it's scary. And also, like you said, like there are people who do really terrible things, and it's really hard to know what to do with them. How do we deal with this issue? But also it's like, not only is that the issue, we also have to acknowledge the reality that the system that we do have does particularly target people of color, particularly Black people. It does particularly target those from the LGBTQIA community. It does particularly target the trans community, like explicitly, like empirically rather. And so are we, on some level, the other question is like, one of the questions it's asking is, even if we have these fears, are we willing to sacrifice our brothers, sisters, and siblings that are not doing the worst things because we're afraid of those who are doing the worst things, you know, because we know about these statistics? That's one of the questions it's asking. And that's another reason why I included some of these facts, let alone the reality of how most women in prison are victims of abuse, sexual abuse. Almost all people in prison suffer, whether it's mental health crises or drug addiction. Those two things alone. If you add poverty, it's literally like 99. So what is prison really doing? It's erasing these victims, and which is bad for them, but also bad for all of us, because it keeps us from having to address the reality of those issues. It individualizes and criminalizes the issue of poverty. It totally keeps us from addressing meaningfully the mental health crises that we have. It totally keeps us from addressing the disease of like addictions. And so it's this double blowback in terms of the harm it's doing, and the harm it's doing by keeping us from actually seeking treatment for our actual ails. So it's a tricky, scary thing, but there's a lot. I do really, after working on this book, I really do believe that like by finding a better way it would heal us in so many different ways.
Yeah. And, one of the most marginalized, underrepresented groups in the US, I think, is Black queer women.
Yep.
And your two main characters basically are the most badass. And you chose specifically to kind of center the story around them. Is there a reason that was that just purposeful, or, what was the inspiration behind that?
So Third War I just kind of had right in my mind already. But, with the book, especially one that you're working on for like 7 years or however long it took me for this, even if it starts off like just cause, it becomes intentional over time, And so with Third War, some of the things you just mentioned were important. I think that there's a particular way in which any person who's like in the public eye is also consumed. And I think that there's a particular way in which women, but particularly Black women, and maybe even more particularly in that a queer Black woman is both loved and hated at the same time, both revered and disrespected. The analog I've been talking about sometimes on tours, like the way, like both LeBron James and Serena Williams occupy a very particular place in like the culture, but I think Serena has to deal with this edge that LeBron doesn't have to. And I think most women doing anything, maybe like it's more obvious in particular when a woman does something that involves physical or athletic prowess, as I'm sure you can understand yourself. There's like another specific energy around it that I think I felt very interested to tackle in a book. And then, so that's why Thorough was who she was. And then Stax kind of came out of needing, Stax really just emerged on her own as well. But I think I wanted her, meaning Third War, to have someone who understood exactly the dynamic that I've just described completely. And so Stax became that person who is like her true partner because she could understand it fully.
Yeah. It was such a great dynamic to read. And as a martial artist, actually reading it was really exciting to hear so many of our foundational principles that were kind of woven into a lot of the fight scenes, like just from the get-go. I believe it was Melancholia to Thor War saying swing through, not at, like all these things, and just how you describe your strikes and your techniques. Do you study martial arts, or do you do any sort of athleticism? Because it feels like you have such a great understanding, like punching through things and pushing through the ground away from the earth. Like all of that is so rooted in my martial arts. So it really spoke to me. So I'm just curious about, and even like knee rehab, like, oh, I'm feeling that right now.
Well, I have experience with that. I've hurt myself many times. Okay. I've done a lot of, and I threw out my back while I was writing this book. So like I had a lot of pain and PT and pain management stuff. But first off, that's a huge compliment to me coming from you. And that I'm very grateful. I actually don't study martial arts explicitly, like in any real way, since maybe I was very, very, very young, but I never was able to like take true classes, which I really wish I could. I probably will. I've done some boxing, I guess. So that's,
okay. Yeah.
I've done some boxing when I was in college. So I guess I did something, but I'm a huge fan of martial arts. I think it's I love like people who can master their bodies. Like, I think that particular mastery of your body is just really interesting and cool to me. So yeah, you saying those things, I'm going to like have that as a memory for myself for a long time. It means a lot to me. I played basketball. I did play sports, and I've definitely played sports. And I understand competition, and I feel like that idea, because besides all those other things, Third War and Sex are competitors too, and that ends up playing a big role. So I think I had access to that, but also I researched stuff. Like I just watch martial artists talk. When I had that wrestling scene, I watched a bunch of wrestling.
Yes, the wrestling.
I had to just watch and read things because I didn't want to be like an asshole.
Well, that's always a good principle, is like, just don't be an asshole.
Yeah. And also like have some respect for like the things you're talking about. I mean, obviously this book requires me a ton of things to be like, but the fighting aspect was a huge part of it. And I always think about like, and again, like something that you have a lot of relationship to, like how even if people never knew, like a show like Avatar: Last Airbender, like the extensive work that went behind the scenes to like getting the like some sort of martial arts sort of foundation over the reality there. It's so apparent the experience of the show. And so even though of course I'm not a martial arts expert, I tried my best to like engage with the people who are and people who think through that type of work and sport and craft, because it's just going to be felt. Even for those, obviously it's different for you who truly understands it, but even for the layperson, there's a feeling of intentionality that can be understood even if you don't have the expertise in the subject.
100%. And one of the other aspects, very martial artsy, by the way, is Thor with her breathing, like breathing into focus and then everything out that, doesn't have to do with the battle. And like, we basically start our class off with breathing in my class, which is, I always tell my students, inhale all the good energy, exhale out all the shit that's just out there, leave it out, outside. And it's super intentional. And, you kind of mentioned mental health earlier, and just even that theme is kind of woven in. I know it's something you've also been open to talking about, how important it is, but like letting words sit in her mind, with Thor, and like somebody who practices meditation and therapy, like there's just a lot of kind of themes in there that show that there's such an importance to that.
Yeah.
And I think especially like in my culture, and correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe even in your culture, like it's certain generations, mental health was very like pushed under the rug. We don't talk about that. We don't, no, therapy, what? And I'm so excited that this generation is learning and doing better with that we can be more open. It's one of the reasons I was really open about my experiences, and that, I think therapy is great. I do therapy. And so I know it's something you've spoken about publicly as well.
Yeah. I think therapy is huge and it's extremely important. Like, and it's a huge blessing that like we're like getting like easier to talk about it. And for me, it felt very, very important also because the period from between my first book and this book, and even the period before that, it's just been such a roller coaster emotionally.
Yeah.
Excuse me. My father passed a little bit before my first book, a little bit after my first book came out.
Okay.
And my mother struggled with mental health stuff for most of my life. And so even though mental health things like shaped my life, I didn't like really talk about it much, but then I think something happened with that first book where it just became like I had to. But also, so the mental health stuff, which is just health, like being able to like having the ability to like notice your thoughts, especially as a writer, it's very, very, very important, but kind of anyone. And I was thinking about how the intentionality between like the breathing and all this stuff, because like meditation is huge for me, but yesterday I've been getting even more, trying to get more like actual fundamental practicing and outside of like apps and stuff. And so I've been going to this, there's actually I'm in the city now. There's actually a temple over here. It happens to be a Korean Buddhist temple. And yesterday the monk was saying exactly what you said. Like it's like you do like this yoga thing, but then at the end is meditation. And he said exactly how you're talking about, which is you breathing in all the good in the universe and breathe out all the like negativity, all that dark, breathe out everything that isn't right now. And literally yesterday we were doing that. So I think there's whether it's in martial arts, there's a lot of fundamental practices that involve that sort of like breath through grounding through the breath and coming in tune to the body through the breath. And I really wanted that to be part of the book because it was becoming a part of my life, but also just feels important for someone who has to do anything difficult.
Yeah. I have the joy of being able to speak to a lot of writers of different mediums, comics and books and just different mediums. And one of the things that always fascinates me is the music aspect. And I saw on your website, you are very in tune with music and hip hop, and curious, like, what your feeling is on the soundtrack for your book. Like I'm hearing, Ready to Die and Give Me the Loot and like just like Kendrick Lamar. Like what's your feelings on this? And like if you were to put a soundtrack to it, what comes out into your mind?
So this one's a lot because there's so many different voices.
Yes.
Like with Friday Black, I could tell you like Dark Sky Paradise, the Big Sean album was like such a thing. I was looping it over and over for certain stories. This one is a song called Don't Want to Fall in Love by a rapper named Kyle. And I think of it, when I hear it, I think of Stacks a lot because there's actually a line I use from that song, but that song samples another song, but there's a line like, who makes the knife feel good, she says. And in the song, it's like, You make the night feel good, you know. And I remember being like, oh, I like that. I was listening to that song a lot, and I remember being like, that is like her thing. Like the night feels good, like but in a different kind of way. Like she became. So that song is something, but definitely like, you know, this huge Biggie stuff. I'm always a Kendrick guy. I'm a huge J. Cole guy.
Okay.
So like that whole album of Forest Hills Drive is huge. 2017 Forest Hills Drive. Obviously Kendrick, I put him on both of my books for a you know, because he's just a huge inspiration for me. Man, and yeah, and then some other stuff that like is probably random and obscure that I can't even like think of right now. But
yeah,
I like a lot of different music, and I try to play around with it myself. So probably I'll put out a project soon, I'm hoping.
Oh, love that. Love that. I mean, one of the things I noticed, because I was kind of watching your video, is like you were showing like your hip hop book and like the faces of Biggie, right? And like we always see the same face. And I think in these characters, it's the same. Like you see one side of them, but there's so many other emotions that everybody has, right? Like everybody, and that's like not just Biggie, right? But like everybody, like even in your book, like the people, you know, when Third War Stacks goes out into the fight arena, they're a different person than they are behind closed doors. They're a different person than they are on their own by themselves, right? Like, and we're all that way, right? We're all like a little bit like, I'm on the podcast. It's the Sifu Mimi Chan show. Like you have to kind of find a space to reserve like for you who you are. Sometimes I feel like there's like a dissonance, right?
It's so key, especially like I'm coming off of a tour. So that like speaks to me like particularly right now, like having like just recently like done all the tour stuff, it can be really hard and really brutal, and you do have to sort of reserve a piece for yourself. Also, I appreciate you talking about that, because I don't that book, because not a lot of people have seen that. I just filmed that myself because I was trying to teach myself Premiere. You know, so and I edited it myself, and so it's fun to think about other people watching that.
I try to do the deep dive, and I was just so fascinated. I loved, you know, all the rap stuff and everything, but I really liked that because it really it showed a little bit about your personality, right? You're like, this is the picture I really like of Biggie right here, where he's smiling. And as a Biggie fan myself, there was an immediate like, oh, I want to see more of this.
I appreciate it.
And I need this book.
It's called Contact High.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It is.
I'm getting a weird collection of like photography books suddenly, I'm realizing, because I have a bunch of them now. But I take pictures. I'm looking at my lenses over there. Yes. And anyways, I just appreciate it.
Yeah, and I saw that you do, I mean, because you're like an artist in so many ways, through your photography, through your writing and your music, and you know, and all of that inspiration. Like, do you find when you're having not even just a story to tell, but something to say, you have specific mediums that you want to do that in? Or is it like...
I think I'm still discovering that. I think lately, like right now, when I want to talk about myself, like Nana, a lot of times it comes out wanting to be a song. Like, but it depends. Like, sometimes like when it's about Nana and I'm aware of it, like it's supposed to be a song, but sometimes it's about you, but you don't really even realize it yet. And so, but a lot of times, like when I've already depersonalized it and it's become about the world and me, I think that's where prose stories come in. But like when I want to like be like selfishly, like it's almost like, because I don't want to write a memoir, I have been writing like these songs.
Okay.
You know, especially because a lot of the content of the early songs that I've only put out one, I think, that's like available on that site, but I have a bunch more. A lot of the content ends up being about how my life has changed because of success in writing in the writerly world. And how there are also challenges that come with that were maybe not what I would have predicted. Pardon me.
Yeah. I think, just a quick like tie into the hip hop, but also Friday Black. Like I said, I'll be honest, I haven't gone through the whole thing, but really just kind of loved your description of dialing up or down Blackness and like what that means. And I was telling my husband about it because he also has it on his queue after reading. He actually listened to your book twice already. Like he wanted to listen to it right away. And he's the scholarly one and likes to take notes and also like kind of helps me kind of get my headspace around things and articulate. But he was like, hey, ask him what is the difference between 4.0 and 4.6. And that's like a deep Jay-Z dive, but parallel, but also like, you know, for our listeners that don't know, basically you're like, oh, you know, in this workspace, I feel like I have to turn my Blackness down. And then in this space, I can't because I'm being seen. I'm not on the phone. And I thought, wow, you know, that really resonates for me. My mom is Chinese Jamaican. And so she was born in Jamaica. And so like I have a really deep connect to, you know, different cultures and trying to absorb that. Cool. And so if I'm with my Jamaican people, we're in patois mode, you know, but then when you feel like you're out in public, you dial that down, right? And in no way would I understand the Black experience. Like that is a whole nother level of dynamic. Still, though, it's just a lot. And so I'd love for you to kind of speak a little to that.
Yeah, and we all have to do a version of it, you know, like it's basically like sometimes a way to create like my surreal conceits in my stories is by taking something that's like a felt experience and making it literal and physical. And so that is an example of doing that with code switching. Mm-hmm. In the case of that story against your, like in terms of thinking about your race. And so that story is about a world in which 5 young Black people have been murdered via chainsaw by this guy. And in that same world, the protagonist, Emmanuel, has this ability to like move his Blackness on a 10-point scale. And so it ends up being, you know, the scale. I mean, I don't want to ruin that story for you, but like it ends up being about, you know, it's a stereotypical, like sort of quantitative idea about what Blackness is. But hopefully the story makes you think about like, what is it? And it's not any one thing, but the story sort of shows you how ridiculous it is to be like this or that. But that said, I do know that there's a voice I use when I'm trying to get a job, you know, or there was anyways. Nowadays it's a little bit different. But back then, when you want to get a job, it's like, you know, hi there, how are you doing today? You know, all of a sudden, because you know what you have to do. But as a Black person, I know that one particular way, but as an Asian American, as a woman, there's so many different things that, you know, that people are constantly judging you against or creating these ideas about you. And to me, freedom is really just not having to care. But if you want to be upwardly mobile in America, that's very hard. And most likely you do have to care on some level. And so thinking about that and trying to just put it into a way that felt useful for that story was what that was about.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that. And I look forward to like diving into more of that because that is not on audio. So it takes me longer to actually be able to consume something. I have to read.
Friday Black? No, you can get it on audio. You can get it on Audible as well. Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm a big library person, you know, too. So, and you know, off air, we'll talk more about
like a Libro, Libro FM. Like, what do you use for your library? Was Libby?
Libby. Yeah.
It should be on. It's on Libby.
Okay. Maybe my library is failing. You know, this is Florida after all, where like they're banning books and shit. So maybe, you know, they're just taking shit off the shelves nonstop. Like That's this is so actually funny. One of the areas I'm working on is education. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but like recently I passed a law for Asian American history to be included in our K-12 system here. So I'm learning to fight that fight and working alongside other groups like, you know, Black history and Holocaust studies and stuff, and just trying to elevate.
You guys have to do it out there. It's really, that's so important. It's like, it's getting scary.
It's super scary. It's super scary that education is now political, whereas who benefits? Definitely not the kids, right? Like we're having just such a disconnect now in that system where we do need to learn about slavery because it's still happening, right? Like from your book, it's like clearly like, wait a minute, this is a form of slavery, and if we don't understand that, we'll continue to repeat the problem. We're going to continue to repeat the bad parts of history. So yeah, it's definitely something that I'm really passionate about, but
it's huge.
It's been a process. And, you know, speaking of like kind of struggles, like one of the things I noticed too with your characters, it's like they're struggling because they are trying to change, but then they're also becoming like better killers at the same time, right? And this is something that watching the 13th and all of that, it's like, does the prison system create the criminals, or does it, you know what I mean? Like, does it actually criminalize more, right? Because some people, like you said, are innocent, and then they're in this environment where it's dog eat dog. So we're watching this dynamic through your characters, which is just fascinating, but also disgusting at the same time, because you're like, I need to see more. And then, you know, you're with them in the arena, watching them fight, and fascinated by that. And I could just see it, like the characters that you have off screen that are watching the tapes, and how gross it is, right? That they're just invested as if it's a soap opera. But I'm like, we're so not far from that. But like, can you talk a little bit about that struggle within those characters of like, they are trying to be better, they want to be free, they want to make a difference, but at the same time, they're just like, they got to keep killing in order to do so.
That's really like a huge part of what I think the book is about, that struggle to survive. And that means literally, but also like to keep yourself intact, your soul intact. How do you, and it ends up being connected to like how we all like to living in the country or any country.
Yeah.
How do you stay you? How do you be a good person when so much is pushing on you, like not caring about the person next to you? How so much is getting you to consider stepping on the other person's head? How do you attain strength but use it ethically and morally? I think and I really like how you said it, like as they become better people, they're getting better at killing, and they have to survive this thing. What does that mean? And how much, and I think that exact tension is so important to this book. And I think it's going to be important to, I've been thinking about it now because we're like, you know, now the strike is done and I can like start more closely thinking about these adaptation potentials. That's really what I feel like is it going to be a big part of the screen treatment as well. How do you stay you and be a good person in a world that's so interested in death and power? And I think, you know, I've thought about it a lot, and I think I'm still thinking about it, but what I'm just saying is that question is like one of the essential questions I think this book is asking.
Yeah. And one other question kind of tied into that is very much that we end up asking ourselves as listeners, as readers. It's like, if I were in that position, what would I be doing? So you've got the, you know, the influencers, you've got the dehumanization of inmates. And it's like, well, if I were in the position of power and I had to somehow control the prisoners, like what tactics would I be taking? Would I be this horrible as what's being portrayed because it's easier to control them? It's very, you know, Nazi-esque. It's pretty raw. And it makes you wonder though, like, well, am I just a soldier following the orders? And like, it's so much conflict all the time, but even in those positions, right? Like what would be the decisions I would be making? Like, I think it was with Simon J. Kraft, you know, kind of going through his storyline.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And question for you is a little bit back into the research thing. It was something like my husband and I were talking about, like wanted to know a little bit more about your research from prison in the 1800s with the no speaking policy. Like, was that modeled? Can you share a little bit about that just from a historical context?
Yeah. So there was a program called a system called the Auburn system.
Yeah.
And it basically formed in Auburn, New York. That's why they named it that, in which they had it so that the prisoners there was a 24-hour silence was enforced, meaning they weren't allowed to speak as a part of being incarcerated. And the idea was that it would make them sort of lose their sense of selves a little bit, or a lot, so that they could be better like cogs in a already like sweatshoppy style machine. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted that because they knew that they wanted to basically make them better Play-Doh to be whatever they needed them to be. And so they already had that sense that, you know, to silence them would be to help create this space. And so I used it as a direct influence for, no pun intended with influence, as a direct influence for a system that I just called the New Auburn system. Sometimes I just like to like say things like that to hammer home a really obvious point. Yeah. And the New Auburn system, in which prisoners are forced to be in a 24-hour silence and if they speak, they get electrocuted, or they get shocked rather. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to because I learned that was something I just learned 100%. I didn't know about that at all. Once I learned that, I was like, oh my God. and it just found its way to the book directly. It wasn't like I had that fact made it appear in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is the greatest thing too. It's like, even though we're looking at a piece of fiction, there's so much facts and stats that you're learning along the way. So thank you for that. My husband did want to give a shout out because he is Dominican, that you included a Dominican in the book.
Rico
And of course,
Morte.
yeah, it had to do.
I live in the Bronx, you know.
Of course, there was food involved with that Dominican. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're going there.
I live in Highbridge, so I live in the Bronx, so
Okay,
I had
there you
to.
go. Okay.
And I mean, and it's funny because my best friend is, and like, you know, my other family's Puerto Rican, so they're gonna be mad that I focused on them. But I love everybody.
Yes, of course.
And my Haitians too. So
Of
everybody,
course,
all of us.
A really quick process question I had, just because, like I said, I speak to so many different writers of different areas. Is some people have told me, like, I've got the beginning, I've got the end, the middle's a real bitch. Like, it's is that kind of true for you too? This is more of a poll.
I think the beginning is hard. I think the middle is hard. I think the end is harder. I think the whole thing is really difficult.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe the very beginning is a little bit, you know, you could roll a little bit. So maybe I'll say like, but the beginning is what, 30 pages? And then you got another 200 and another 300 to go. So yeah, the first 30 pages were easy. Then the next 300 were very hard. Yeah. Extremely hard. The hardest thing I've ever done creatively.
Yeah. And you said 7 years, right?
Yes.
Wow. And I imagine the feeling must be just a complete joy. I mean, having like made a documentary once and knowing like, oh my God, it's over is one thing, but then the accolades, the reviews, the acclaim, like does it finally feel like that validation, or were you just happy to be done, or it's all of it?
How does it feel? I think there was a really, really nice period before the book was out, but it was done.
Yeah.
And when you asked me this question, I was saying, I feel really good because I know I gave it my best swing. And I was like, whatever happens, happens, because I gave it my absolute best swing. You know, like if you do certain, like, you know, if you compete and you tried your very best and you know you did, it's almost like you can feel comfortable with the results.
Yeah.
I felt that way for a pretty good amount of time. At this moment, I think I'm a little disconnected from that feeling. I think it's harder as the book exists in the world, and these award. I mean, obviously, I'm grateful because these award things are happening, but there's something weird that happens with those where you start viewing it through this lens that is congratulatory, but also somehow reductive too. Because once you start thinking about, sorry, I'm getting kind of existential about this.
Please, love it.
Once you get, it's kind of like when they say, like, you know, if you fly by them, you'll fall by them. It's like once you start thinking about these awards, and again, I know like just being nominated is great, but like,
I know,
but like you want to win, and once you start, you know what I mean, saying once you start subscribing to that way of viewing yourself and your work, it gets a little bit smaller than it was. That like all encompassing like satisfaction of having done the thing becomes now conditional. And so I try my best to not be super engaged with that stuff, but it's just hard. And so right now I'm very grateful that I was able to do it. I'm very grateful that to have a Sifu, a martial arts expert, think a little bit that some of the things felt valid is like a huge, that kind of thing to me is way bigger than winning an award, to be honest. And that said, though, it's hard I have to hold that in my mind though. So yeah, I feel pretty grateful. I've been very lucky with both my books that they've been both pretty critically, like almost insanely critically, you know, that stuff has been pretty insane.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just try my best to just rest in gratitude and hope that I don't feel too high or too low whenever anything else happens.
Yeah, I completely understand, not on the scale of which your book has splashed into the public eye, but my husband will say, well, every film festival you went to, you won an award, but you couldn't even enjoy it because you were thinking about the next one. Did you get in? And are you going to be nominated? And are you going to win it then? And all of these things, right? And I was like, you're so right. And so My only advice is exactly what you're doing, is live in that gratitude, but like just enjoy every time someone gives you, the props, and every award that comes your
Yeah.
way. I would just say try to really enjoy that space, because it just goes so fast, and we can make ourselves crazy with like you said, that inner struggle, that inner narrative. So I completely understand how you feel on a much smaller scale, but
Not a smaller scale. It's all this. It's not a smaller scale. That's just as big of a scale or bigger. It's all, it's all just stuff. Like,
yes,
because like what you did is, it's about the effort you put into, not how much other people care about it.
I know, right? You're just like, I got to do this for myself, but it's hard. It's so hard, right? Because then you get people telling you stuff, and that gets in your head. It's hard to not listen to the noise.
I think about that often. Like, so, I mean, film is one, because film is interesting because people do care about film, and books kind of, but like, say, if you're a dancer or whatever, I don't know what the highest award for a dancer is, but if you get that, it's not less or smaller, bigger than the Oscar, because everyone cares about the Oscars. Everyone cares about the Oscars because they're easy to commodify, and it's really, so it's like, if your sport is cricket and you win the bet, and that's I mean, cricket's huge globally, but not America. But say you're in America playing cricket, and whatever the American cricket like championship is, it's not smaller than the Super Bowl. It's all about like just like the effort you put in, not just like the random. So I try my best, but yeah, I'm with you. I think it's really good advice I'm getting better at receiving it, but it's really hard to receive it and not go crazy with it, because I am in my heart a competitive person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you're an athlete. You did sports. I mean, you are like you're taught to learn to play to win. I mean, we're not playing to lose, right? We play to win. And it's part of our nature, I think, as humans as well. But I think it can be healthy for us if we have it in the right framing. So, but from my experience, I mean, this is like 10 plus years ago, like, oh my gosh, I couldn't enjoy those moments. And I'm very much hoping that you're giving yourself a good treat to eat, or you're spending time with the people that make you happy. Last question before we wrap up, because I don't want to take up your whole day. Earlier, I told you, do you have 5 hours? Because I have so much more to digest with this. But I also saw that you like cosplay and geeking out a little bit. And I just came from Rose City Comic Con, where I was just surrounded by all the cosplay. And I thought about you because we were going to have a conversation, and I want to hear a little bit about your geek out.
Yeah, I'm a pretty big nerd, even though I haven't gone crazy down the cosplay. Like, I've always like made my own cosplay stuff. And the one you saw is probably the same like robe that I've worn this in real life. I just, to make it cosplay, I just got some Naruto headbands and like a giant sword, which is over there. It's right here. I'll show you. With this giant black sword that I got from someone else, actually. The hard part was trying to fit in the Uber.
Right. I love it. Yes.
Taller than me. I'm like 6 foot tall. I'm like 6'3", actually, and this is like my height. But anyways, I think the fun part about the cosplay is like getting to like write your own little character. It's like the fan fiction aspect of it. Yeah. So that year I did Naruto. One time I've been Vegeta before, but in my head I was like another different Saiyan. I don't know if you know Dragon Ball. I'm just like naming anime stuff.
I'm familiar with Dragon Ball. I know Naruto. I used to watch a little bit, but then after Shippuden, it was like, okay, I can't keep up. And
it got worse after that. But yeah, I just imagine myself like a ninja.
So you like a lot of the anime, manga, like that's your jam.
That's my jam.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I'll be going to Japan at the end of the month, so I'll be thinking about you when I see all the.
Where are you going?
We start in Tokyo, and I'll also be going to Osaka and Kyoto and Okinawa. So yeah,
that's so
very
cool.
Exciting. Yeah. So
I really want to go.
Have you been?
No.
Oh, well, your book tour has to take you there, obviously, right? Like
the first book was made in Japanese, and the new one is coming in Japan. So I hope for this new one I get to go. I really
Oh my gosh. You have to.
It's where I want to go most in the world.
I'm sure, obviously, with your love of
that I haven't gone yet.
Of the lore. Right. Okay. So that makes sense. And, I think that's one of the best things about these tours is like you can, work in a few days for yourself, like, and give yourself that treat, right? Like that
hopefully
would be
you can.
ideal.
When my American tour, I could not, but hopefully I can. Yeah, it was sad. It was tough. Yeah.
Oh my
I had
gosh.
19 flights in 20 days. It was really
Oh
hard.
I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm still recovering from my one flight home, and I'm a little jet lag. I'm old though.
I'm never doing it again. I'm never doing it again. I told them I'm never doing this like this level again.
Yeah, that's insane. Super insane. So in 2019 at San Diego Comic-Con, I hosted a panel for cosplayers on how to properly hold and pose with their swords. So
What's the you did like this telling them like legitimate ways.
Yes, because what would drive me crazy at these cosplay contests is seeing these like kick-ass amazing costumes, and then they'd come out with their sword and they'd literally be like holding it where they would be cutting their arm or like
cutting your head off like this.
Yes, yeah. So I went through and I thought, let me do a panel on that, and San Diego.
That's an amazing panel. Yeah, don't do this. Do something like. Well, I try to imagine like this is like a sheath form, but like don't do this. So
you got a dull edge and then a sharper edge, like a broadsword.
Yeah.
But that was one of my panels, so I thought you'd find that a lot of fun.
I find that amazing. That's actually amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
So we can talk more off air about your cosplay stuff, but I loved talking to you. Like I said, I have hours of more material to deep dive into this if you ever want to come back and talk. And also, it sounds like it's getting adapted for the screen.
We're trying. We'll see what happens.
Yes. Yeah, I can see it visually. It's super visual, especially since I did the audio. So congratulations on not all the awards, but just on an amazing piece of work that allowed me personally, selfishly, it's all about me, but personally to think, to question myself, to have these themes more in my face so that I can continue my awareness and be, alert and just have a deeper empathy and understanding. So thank you for that. I am so appreciative.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. This is really generous of you. So I am extremely humbled. Thank you so much.
All right. Nana, Kwame, everybody, please go and purchase the book. Look into both books, actually, and I will link all of that here. And you can follow on social. I'll link all that here as well. Anything else you want to add?
No, thanks. Thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
Sweet.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.